Tears streamed down Donte DiVincenzo's face as he held the microphone with trembling hands. The press room was in absolute silence, the kind of silence that happens when people know they are about to hear something that will change their lives forever. "The hardest lesson of my life I learned from Steph Curry," he said, his choked voice carrying the weight of a transformation that few can fully comprehend. To understand the devastating power of these words, you need to go back in time with me to a moment when I believed my career had reached its end before it had truly begun. It was October 2022, and San Francisco's autumn brought that damp cold that penetrates to the bones. I was at the airport, looking through the window at the city that stretched before me like an ocean of possibilities and fears. Have you ever felt like you were holding your last chance in your hands, knowing that if you let it slip away, there wouldn't be another? Golden State Warriors. The name echoed in my mind like a prayer and a curse at the same time. It was my third team in 2 years. Third chance. Maybe the last one. Injuries had been cruel to me. First the ankle, then the wrist, then that knee contusion that kept me away for months when I should have been proving my worth. Each doctor, each physical therapist, each coach who shook their head with that expression of another wasted talent had left an invisible scar on my soul. Donte DiVincenzo, 25 years old, coming from the Milwaukee Bucks, I read in the sports article I had Googled myself. The words that came after cut like sharp blades. Unfulfilled promise. Wasted potential. Last opportunity. What's most impressive is how our mind can transform others' opinions into our own truth. I had begun to believe that maybe they were right. I arrived at the Chase Center that first training day, carrying more than just a bag of equipment. I carried the weight of all the unmet expectations, of all the dreams that seemed to slip through my fingers like fine sand. Steve Kerr, the coach, welcomed me with that genuine smile that made people immediately feel lighter. "Donte, welcome to the Warriors. We're excited to work with you." But I knew that tone. It was the same cordial tone coaches use when they're not sure if the player will last more than a month. It was the kind of kindness that keeps doors open but doesn't hand over the keys to the house. "Thank you, Coach. I'll do my best," I replied, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. In the first days, I observed everything with the eyes of someone who knew they were being observed. Every movement, every shot, every run was evaluated by people who had already seen dozens of wasted talents pass through there. Have you ever had the feeling that you were competing not just against opponents, but against your own history of failures? I felt like every practice was a trial, every mistake a confirmation that maybe it was too late to change the narrative of my career. Jordan Poole, my position teammate, tried to be encouraging. "Man, you have talent. You just need to believe in yourself," he would say after practices, with that youthful energy that only those who haven't yet faced true failure can maintain. But believing in myself? How to do that when I had spent the last 2 years collecting evidence that maybe I wasn't good enough? It was a Thursday, 6th week of training, when everything changed. I had arrived early at the gym, more from anxiety than dedication. Sleep had been elusive the night before, filled with nightmares where I received release calls, where agents stopped returning my calls, where my career simply ended. The Chase Center was in silence. That kind of silence that exists only when you believe you are completely alone. The smell of rubber from sneakers against the waxed floor, mixed with the metallic aroma of dried sweat from previous practices, created an atmosphere that was both familiar and strange. I was heading to the locker room when I heard something that made my heart stop for a moment. the rhythmic and hypnotic sound of a ball bouncing on the floor. Then, the soft whisper of the net being touched by a perfect shot. Then, silence. Then again, ball, net, silence. It was impossible not to feel that there was something different about that sound. It wasn't the hurried noise of an official practice. It was something more intimate, more sacred. I approached the door that gave access to the main court, moving as if I were entering a temple. And when I peeked through the small glass window, I saw something that would change my life forever. Steph Curry was alone on the court. He wasn't just training. He was in communion with something greater. Every movement carried a dedication that transcended technique or professional obligation. It was pure love transformed into work. Great things happen when no one is watching, and I was about to discover that some of life's greatest lessons come to us in moments of absolute silence. I watched for 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours. Steph Curry, the man who had already conquered everything in basketball, was there alone, at 6:30 in the morning, perfecting fundamentals he had already mastered for decades. No words were spoken, no glances were exchanged, but, in that moment, I understood that I had just received the first lesson from the most difficult and transformative university of my life. The REIT's university where the professor was Steph Curry, and the only subject was how to become the best version of yourself, even when no one is watching. That night, I could barely sleep. The image of Steph Curry alone on the court echoed in my mind like a song you can't stop humming. It was impossible not to feel that I had witnessed something sacred, something that few have the privilege to witness. The next morning, I arrived at the gym 15 minutes earlier. My heart was beating fast, a mixture of curiosity and nervousness running through my veins like pure adrenaline. Would I see it again? Had that been just an isolated case? When I approached the court, there he was. Again, Steph Curry, alone, at 6:30 in the morning, in communion with his craft. Have you ever watched someone do something with such passion that it becomes hypnotic? That's exactly what I felt. Every shot carried decades of dedication. Every movement was a silent prayer to basketball. But what impressed me most wasn't the technical perfection. I knew he was extraordinary. What shocked me was the humility. Steph Curry, who had already broken every imaginable three-point shooting record, was there perfecting fundamentals as if he were a rookie. During that week, I established a secret routine. I would arrive early, observe for a few minutes through the window, then go to the locker room to prepare as if nothing had happened. It was my private university, where classes had no words, only examples. On the third morning, something changed. While I was watching Steph work, a realization hit my chest like a punch. I had never worked like that. I had never given everything I had when no one was watching. How many times in life do we pretend dedication only when there's an audience? I was realizing that my entire career had been a performance. I trained well when coaches were watching. I ran harder when there were scouts in the stands. But when I was alone, when no one was measuring my effort, the truth hurt like an open wound. I had always reserved my best version for moments of visibility. Jordan Poole noticed something was different about me. "Man, you've been strange this week. Everything okay?" he asked after a particularly intense practice. "Just thinking about some things," I replied, not knowing how to explain that I was having life lessons at 6:30 in the morning. But the transformation had already begun to be born within me, like a seed planted in fertile soil. On the fourth morning, I didn't just observe. I entered the auxiliary court and began my own silent ritual. It was strange at first, shooting without music, without conversation, without distraction. Just me, the ball, and the hypnotic sound of the net being touched. The silence was deafening, but also revealing. In every missed shot, I heard the echoes of all the times I had given up too early. In every hit, I felt a glimpse of what could happen if I really dedicated myself to becoming extraordinary. What's most impressive is how invisible work reveals who we really are when no one is applauding. During these silent mornings, I began to understand that Steph Curry wasn't just a great basketball player. He was an artist dedicated to his craft, a professional who understood that excellence is not an act, but a habit cultivated in moments of solitude. On the sixth morning, something unexpected happened. While I was finishing my shots on the auxiliary court, I heard footsteps approaching. It was Steph Curry. "Good morning, Donte," he said, his voice carrying that natural calm that radiated confidence. "I saw you training here the last few mornings." My heart stopped. He had seen me? For how long? "Good morning, Steph," I managed to reply, trying to hide the nervousness in my voice. "It's good to see someone who understands," he said, grabbing a ball and making a casual shot that hit perfectly. "Most people think greatness happens during games, but the truth is, it's built on mornings like this. Have you ever received validation that completely changed your perspective about yourself?" In that moment, I understood that I wasn't just learning about basketball, I was learning about character. "Steph," I asked, gathering courage, "can I ask something? Why do you still train like this? I mean, you've already proven everything you had to prove." He smiled, that smile that carried wisdom accumulated over years of dedication. "Donte, I don't train to prove anything to anyone. I train because that's the kind of person I chose to be. Great things happen when you commit to excellence, regardless of who's watching." Those words echoed in my soul like bells ringing in a cathedral. It wasn't about talent. It wasn't about recognition. It was about identity. It was about choosing to be excellent as a lifestyle, not as a strategy. "The question you need to ask yourself," Steph continued, "isn't, what do I need to do to succeed? The question is, what kind of person do I want to become?" Because when you answer that honestly, the work becomes automatic. In that moment, something fundamental broke inside me. All the excuses, all the justifications, all the if only disappeared like mist under the morning sun. I had spent years trying to convince the world that I deserved a chance, when in reality, I should have spent those years becoming someone who deserved any chance that appeared. The University of Silence had taught me its first great lesson. Excellence isn't about what you do when others are watching. It's about who you become when no one is around. And I was ready to become someone completely new. The change didn't happen overnight. It came like dawn, gradual, but inevitable. In the weeks following my encounter with Steph, I began to implement a new philosophy that was growing within me like a flame that had finally found oxygen. It was impossible not to feel that each morning was an opportunity to become a better version of myself. My routine was completely transformed. I arrived at the gym at 6:15, 15 minutes before Steph. Not to compete with him, but to honor what I had learned about personal commitment. Invisible work had become my religion. Steve Kerr was the first to notice. "Donte, I don't know what changed, but keep doing what you're doing," he said, after a practice where I had given every gram of energy I possessed. But the real change wasn't just in the practices. It was in how I approached every aspect of my professional life. I began studying game videos until late hours, not because someone had asked, but because I wanted to understand every nuance of the Warriors system. Jordan Poole joked with me, "Man, you turned into a robot. What's this obsession?" But I saw admiration in his eyes. He knew something fundamental had changed. The first real opportunity came in December. Gary Payton II got injured, and Steve Kerr needed someone to take important minutes in the rotation. It was my chance to prove that the transformation wasn't just internal. Have you ever felt the weight of a moment that can define your entire future? That's exactly what I felt when Kerr called me into his office. "Donte, I'm going to give you an opportunity. Not because you're perfect, but because I see that you're committing to becoming the best version of yourself. That's what we need on this team." That night, against the Denver Nuggets, I entered the game in the second quarter. My hands trembled slightly, but not from nervousness. It was pure adrenaline mixed with a confidence I had never felt before. What happened in the next 12 minutes would change everything. They weren't spectacular numbers, 8 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. But it was the way I played. Every movement carried purpose. Every decision was connected with months of silent preparation. Every shot echoed those solitary mornings where I learned that excellence is a habit, not an accident. Steph came to me in the EBE locker room after the game. "Now you understand," he said, with that smile that carried genuine pride. "It's not about the numbers. It's about who you become in the process." How many times in life do we receive validation from someone we deeply admire? In that moment, I understood that I had found more than a mentor. I had found a mirror of what I could become. The 2022 to 2023 season unfolded like a symphony, where every note was in perfect harmony. I was no longer that desperate player trying to prove his worth. I was someone who had discovered his value through daily, invisible, but transformative work. In February, against the Los Angeles Lakers, I experienced the moment that crystallized my entire transformation. It was the fourth quarter. We were losing by 3 points, and there were only 2 minutes left on the clock. Kerr put me on the court at a crucial moment. Not as a favor, not as an experiment, but because I had become someone he could trust in the moments that mattered most. The gym was in deafening silence. 20,000 people holding their breath. LeBron James defending against me. The pressure was palpable, like an electrical storm about to explode. But something extraordinary happened. I felt at peace. All those silent mornings, all those solitary shots, all those hours studying videos had prepared me for exactly this moment. Not just technically, but emotionally and spiritually. I hit a 3-point shot with 1 minute and 30 seconds on the clock. I forced a critical defensive turnover. I made the assist for Steph's winning shot. Great things happen when years of preparation meet a moment of opportunity. And that night, I finally understood what Steph had been trying to teach me from the first day. After the game, in the locker rooms, there was a moment of silence that spoke louder than any celebration. Steph approached and put his hand on my shoulder. "Donte, you saved this game for us." But I knew the truth. He had saved me much before that. Not just as a player, but as a person. Not just my career, but my soul. What's most impressive is how a person can change the complete trajectory of their life simply by choosing to dedicate themselves to excellence when no one is watching. That season, my numbers weren't spectacular. Average of 9.4 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. But numbers never tell the real story, do they? The real story was about a man who had learned that greatness isn't about natural talent. It's about daily commitment to becoming extraordinary, even in the most silent and invisible moments. The real story was about how Steph Curry, without giving a single motivational speech, had taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. You become what you commit to every day, especially when no one is watching. And that lesson, well, that lesson was about to echo far beyond basketball courts, touching hearts around the entire world. We returned to that press room, 3 years after the transformation. Donte DiVincenzo took a deep breath, tears still shining in his eyes, and continued with words that were about to touch millions of hearts around the world. "You want to know what the hardest lesson of my life was?" he asked, his voice loaded with an emotion so genuine it was impossible not to feel that something special was happening. "I spent years thinking I needed to impress other people to have value. I trained when coaches were watching. I worked hard when there were scouts in the stands. I pretended to be dedicated when it was convenient." The silence in the room was absolute. Each word fell like raindrops on dry earth, being absorbed by the total attention of everyone present. But Steph Curry taught me something that changed my life forever. Greatness isn't a performance you turn on when there's an audience. Greatness is who you choose to be when you're completely alone. Donte paused, looking at the cameras as if he were speaking directly to each person who would watch that video. He never gave me a motivational speech, never told me what to do. He simply was. Every day, at 6:30 in the morning, there he was, alone, working, not because he needed to prove something, but because he had chosen to be excellent as a lifestyle. The emotion in his voice intensified, carrying the weight of gratitude that transcended words. The hardest lesson was realizing that I had wasted years of my life trying to convince the world that I deserved a chance, when I should have spent that time becoming someone who deserved any chance that appeared. Have you ever heard words that completely redefined your perspective on effort and character? For millions of people watching, that moment would become exactly that. "Steph saved me," Donte continued, his voice breaking slightly. "He didn't give me advice. He didn't make me promises. He showed me that invisible work builds invisible character. And invisible character creates visible results." Tears now flowed freely down Donte's face, but he continued, determined to deliver his complete message. "Great things happen when you stop trying to impress others and start committing to excellence for the simple fact that it's who you chose to be." In that moment, something extraordinary happened in the press room. A veteran reporter began to applaud, then another. In seconds, the entire room was standing, applauding not just a basketball player, but a man who had found the courage to speak a universal truth. The video of that press conference spread across social media like wildfire in dry brush. In 24 hours, it had more than 50 million views. In a week, it had been translated into dozens of languages. But the numbers didn't tell the real story. The real story was in the comments. Hundreds of thousands of people sharing how those words had changed their perspectives on work, dedication, and purpose. A businessman from Seattle wrote, "I always trained my team when there were important visitors. Today, I started training my team every day because it's who I chose to be." A medical student from Brazil commented, "I stopped studying to impress professors and started studying to save lives. The difference is transformative." A family father from Detroit posted, "I was always a good father when my wife was watching. Today I decided to be a good father because it's who I want to be, always." What's most impressive is how a lesson learned in silence can echo in millions of lives around the world. Steph Curry watched the video at home, alone. At the end, He smiled with that serenity that comes from knowing you planted seeds that grew far beyond what you imagined possible. He had never planned to teach anything to Donte DiVincenzo. He had simply chosen to be consistent with his values, regardless of who was or wasn't observing. But that's the magic of invisible work. It echoes in ways we can never predict or control. 6 months after the press conference, Donte received a special invitation. A school in Oakland, the same Oakland where Steph Curry had grown up, wanted him to speak to 500 young people about dedication and character. On the day of the lecture, Donte looked at those young faces and saw reflections of himself a few years ago. Young people full of dreams, but perhaps without completely understanding what would be necessary to transform dreams into reality. How many of you here want to be extraordinary? He asked. All hands went up. Great. Now tell me, what do you do when no one is watching? The silence that followed was deep and reflective. It was the kind of silence that precedes great transformations. Because the truth is that you become what you commit to every day, especially in moments when no one is watching, no one is measuring, no one is applauding. At the end of the lecture, a 16-year-old young man approached Donte. Mr. DiVincenzo, how can I know if I'm really committing to excellence? Donte smiled, remembering an October morning when a similar question echoed in his own soul. It's simple, he replied. Ask yourself, who are you when you're completely alone? Because that person, that's who you really are. And that person determines who you'll become. Great things happen when we understand that our true greatness isn't measured by the applause we receive, but by the consistency with which we honor our values when no one is around. Steph Curry's lesson had become a movement. One man's invisible work had inspired the invisible work of millions. And perhaps that's the most beautiful truth of all. When you choose to be extraordinary in silence, you give permission for others to do the same. The echo never stops. It simply multiplies from heart to heart, from life to life, forever.